Hi there. I'm a Texan. I live in California, but I'm just letting you know I'm friendly. Yeah. Well, y'all are brave. Did they tell you? You do know what you came to, right? I'm just checking. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming. This is a subject obviously very near and dear to my heart, or I wouldn't be doing this. Still wonder why I'm doing this sometimes, but it's an honor to be here. And just to add, drama to the evening, I'm here. My mother is, I'm going to tell very vulnerable things, tonight. My mother is here. My sister is here. And while my wife is not here, her mom and dad are. So this is going to be real exciting. No, but it's a privilege. I just care a lot about people getting the freedom that Jesus died for them to have, And I know that your church feels similarly. And, while the world is arguing about LGBT and there's all this fanfare and division and all these different things, the individual is the person that needs help, right? Whatever that looks like in their lives, these are people to be loved, people to be cared for, people to be understood, people to rally around and rally for. And so please know that my heart tonight is to help give you an inside the mind glimpse into what goes on. I mean, if there are 30 LGBTQ identified people in front of you, then there are 30 different stories. And if you've met one LGBTQ person, then you've met one. You haven't met all of them or even a few of them, So this highly individualized stuff we're talking about. But I do want to open up a conversation, let you hear some stories. And, Jesus was moved with compassion and healed the sick. Right? I think there's meaning in the fact that there was compassion there in that example of healing. And I believe that we'll be much better advocates of people's redemption, restoration, healing when we can feel what they feel as best we can. So Father, I just pray that you, as has already been prayed, Lord, I pray, Lord, that you would just take over this time. That those that are here with us tonight, that it's like, I really need this. I pray that they would get that tonight from you. And I pray for peace. I just pray for, any emotions that might be riding high because we care about people. Or maybe I care about myself and I need help myself. I thank you, Lord, that you're here and that you are the best Father any of us have ever found, and that you're going to care for every person tonight. So we love you, Jesus. We pray for you to say, like Pastor Jeff said, that I'd say some things I don't know, and that you would help us in Jesus' name. Amen? Okay. Well, my plan for the evening would be to give you just a quick introduction of what my ministry is, what kind of resources we have to offer, because we probably won't answer every question you might have tonight, and I want you to know where you could go if you want to find out more. I'll tell a little bit of my story, my personal testimony, and then I'll share more of that on Sunday morning. I'm going to give a real quick crash course on what belief set am I coming to you with, because there are 60 different belief sets on this topic in this room, I can just tell you right now. A lot of them might be real similar, but they're all a little bit different. And so I'm going to just take a little time to let you know where I'm coming from, what I believe, and then we'll talk specifically about, okay, what do we do about kids? I mean, this is a parenting night, so I will talk about that for a bit, and like what can we do? There's a lot of different scenarios that we could be having in our lives, so I will try to cover as much as I can, and then I'm going to try to leave 20, 30 minutes for questions. So that's the plan. Y'all sound good with that? Okay. All right, so the way that I began in this ministry, I've been an associate pastor at Bethel Church up in Redding, California. You might have heard of Bethel Music, for almost 17 years. And my first 10 years there, I was in an associate pastor role, and I was helping build a network of churches connected to Bethel. But that wasn't my passion. And my passion was sexual purity. How do we give that part of our lives to the Lord and get him involved in such a way that I find peace and righteousness and a lifestyle that honors the Lord and protects everybody around me? And that just started growing. I was a part of a men's purity group for a number of years, a couple of years into my becoming a pastor at Bethel. And that's what I became passionate about. And so about 7 years ago, we switched my role to start pioneering an LGBTQ ministry at Bethel. And then the Lord, brought a couple of people kind of into my life that also had that experience. One of them is Elizabeth Wanning. She's my ministry partner and co-founder. She's a theologian, and she went to seminary as an out and proud lesbian back in the early 2000s. And so I never lived in the gay community. She did for a decade or decade and a half, something like that. But the Lord had brought her out of that life. And so we found each other and started saying, well, what do you know about this? Because my journey really happened over about 15 or 20 years of leaving an experience of life, confusion over my sexuality, and then finding a wife and moving on and all of that. And so through all that time, it's kind of like, well, what do I know? I think I know a lot, but I don't remember what that is, kind of a thing. And then we had children, and so then anything I might have known, I forgot, changing diapers at 2 a.m. So anyway, but we started comparing notes and realized, actually, we probably do have some things that people that don't have this life experience might want to know out there. And so after, just about the time we started kind of figuring out what we might pull together as some trainings to help people, then California, in 2018, California proposed a law that was going to consider it to be consumer fraud if anyone accepted money offering help for a person to leave an LGBTQ life behind. It was called AB 2943. And so if someone held a Christian conference and charged money for the conference and then started quoting from the Bible on anything talking about homosexuality, that could have been considered illegal. Or definitely a Christian counselor, if that counselor was going to leave the door open for you to maybe journey out of an LGBT life, then that would have been considered consumer fraud. And so that practitioner could have been possibly lost their license or definitely been fined and all of that. And so that was going to seriously hamper our ministry that we had just pioneered. Plus, it's just like, well, it isn't true that God can't address any area of our lives. And so that's not okay with me, that the state of California would violate freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, and freedom of religion on my topic. And all of a sudden, I got a phone call, and they're like, would you testify, in the hearing at the Capitol this Tuesday, opposite the congressperson, who sponsored the bill, who is a gay man himself. And I'm like, so you're asking me if I will walk into the California State Capitol surrounded by a bunch of legislators who want to delete me, and there might be one or two out of 16 who maybe would be tolerant of my viewpoint. You'd like for me to go do that? Great, And I found myself saying, yes, I'll do that. And I was like, that's really dumb, Ken. And so this is me, and Elizabeth is behind me there testifying. And they looked at us like we had three heads. I had my 2 minutes to share my testimony. And I thought, they don't believe us. They think we're lying. I don't know what they think, but we're not influencing them. And so I thought, we need a book. We need something more to tell them, look, it's not, because I knew dozens of people with my testimony, so did Elizabeth, and they know dozens of people. And so within 7 weeks' time, from the time I had that idea until we had a color, almost 40 stories with photos and everything put together, we descended on the Capitol. We phoned our friends, they phoned their friends, and people got on airplanes and flew to California, and we did a 2.5 hour airing of our testimonies on the Capitol steps, and Fox News picked it up. Facebook went live on a stream on Facebook, has over 1 million views now. And so what California didn't realize was the worst thing that they could do was propose that, because then it pulled all these people. Because people like me, mostly you haven't heard of them, because most people are smarter than I am. They realize that once you finally get this issue kind of addressed in your life, you just move on, and you don't really want to do all this anymore. You're like, you've been trying to be normal your whole life. If you find a sliver of that, you should hold on to it, And so there are a lot of more people out there with this testimony that you would never know, because they just finally found a new way forward, and they stayed in that lane, So these people, several of them kind of came out of hiding. They'd never gone public with their stories before, but they're like, this is not okay with me, because this will keep people from ever having an opportunity to have the experience that I've had a chance to have. And so it started a movement called Changed Movement. That's the name of our ministry now. And so that's how we began. So we never intended to get involved in politics, but it turns out we didn't have a choice, because the politics was going to take away not everybody else's freedoms, but ours, and our ability to reach people with the hope of the gospel in your sexuality. So that's how we began. So I'm going to show you just a real quick slideshow, but these are, so at the same time that was happening, a different group of people from the East Coast, the Lord had told them to start holding open-air gatherings of worship and testimony sharing of people that had come out of an LGBT background, which was a dream that Elizabeth and I had had for a couple of years. And we were like, we've got to get a gathering on the mall in Washington, all that. And at the same moment that this law pops up, and we're starting to figure out how we can rally enough people against that bill, someone invites us to come to this thing in Washington, D.C., and lo and behold, our vision, someone else was doing our specific vision on the mall in Washington, D.C., and we fly out to that, and then now we had a group of people that were willing to come and help us testify and make a show of force in California. Just amazing how the Lord works. And so then all of a sudden, we had 100 new friends, that we could relate to. And so we started gathering in different cities, and we've had these different freedom marches in quite a few cities around the country and a couple internationally. This is Angel Colon and Luis Ruiz. Angel, in the red jacket, was on the cover of the Advocate magazine. Both of these guys were in the nightclub, the Orlando Pulse nightclub shooting, where 50 people got shot or were killed. Angel was shot 6 times, and Luis was trampled. And both of them rededicated their lives on the floor of the nightclub. Luis's mother, the night before the shooting, saw the shooting happen. The Lord showed her the whole thing in a dream. And she was begging him not to go, because she's like, something bad is going to happen. I just had this dream. There was a shooting. He goes anyway. The shooting happens. But he survives, rededicates his life to the Lord, and both these guys are on fire for the Lord still to this day. Good friends of ours. Here we are. We go regularly to Washington, D.C. We actually are even invited to help craft legislation, even at the federal level in some cases. We meet with senators and congresspeople and their staff and help them understand this issue with compassion and with scientific integrity, like an understanding of what happens biologically, like what is true in science, and then also just advocating for religious freedom and freedom of speech. And so different groups of us go and meet with different state legislatures, but as well as federal legislatures. This is us in Taiwan. When AB 2943 happened in California, a similar bill was happening in Taiwan, they saw how we were fighting it in California and said, hey, can we take your changed book and translate it into Mandarin and use it in Taiwan? We said, okay, sure. And so then they started holding these gatherings, these large open air gatherings with entertainment and stuff like that, and sharing of testimonies. So this was the other major vision that I had years before, was that we would do these big open air demonstrating what it looks like when the Lord gets a hold of a person like this, that they're not just a project or not identified by just something from their past. They have gifts and talents and a rich life and all this. And so we got to go and participate in that and be at this amazing event. This is our friend Matthew Grech in the yellow shirt. If you're following top news stories right now, he's the one that's from Malta that won the X Factor in Malta as an on-fire Christian there who came out of homosexuality and is now being threatened with jail time and fines for sharing his testimony in Malta. So he merely shared his testimony of what the Lord did for him several months ago, and then now is being accused of so-called conversion therapy and is threatened with jail. And so he's got a whole legal team that's fighting for him there, and that kind of stuff is happening all around the world. I don't know if you're aware, but that's why we're involved in advocacy, because that's coming to America. It's in Canada, it's in Australia, it's in a bunch of Europe and different nations. So this man, pray for him. His name is Matthew Grech. And then the Lord's going to turn it for good, but one of our friends. And then this is our team. They're the ones sitting on the front row, the guy in the white shirt, stuff like that. That's my team there. And Oregon is trying to pass a bill just like that AB 2943 bill. It's come up in Oregon now. And this is for adults, by the way. They're saying that an adult may not pursue counseling or resources to leave behind LGBT if they desire it. So they would not have that option anymore. It would be illegal for someone to try to help that. Now, if you want to head that direction, you can, but you cannot head the other direction. And so our team was there testifying in that hearing. So that's just a little slideshow of kind of what we're involved in. Anybody that wants more to track along with us, or if this, because that's kind of some of the political stuff. Now we're just going to talk about ministry the rest of the time. But whether you have ministry issues that you care about, or even some of the advocacy stuff, and you want to track along with us, you can go on Facebook to Change the Movement, and we have a closed Facebook group there. Mention that you came to this Resonate Life training, because a lot of people are trying to get in there for nefarious reasons. So, but there's just a community of several thousand people, half of which are on their own journey out. The rest are counselors and parents and pastors, and it's just a place where we're able to offer encouragement. Like, hey, sometimes this journey can be lonely or it can be hard, but you're not alone. There's hundreds of us in here that are on the same journey and meeting the Lord along that way. Are you guys tracking okay so far? This is heavy stuff. Sorry. Did you give that disclaimer at the beginning? I'm going to blame that on you, Jeff. So there's our book of testimonies. I'll mention a few of our resources. If you're like, after tonight, if you're like, gosh, I still have quite a few questions that I wish he would have gone into more depth on these different things, Thrive there, that top left there, is a free video series that I put together a couple years ago where I interview the brightest and best ministers on LGBTQ topics, our friends from around the world, and we just go through different major issues, trans issue and codependency, and the unforgiveness that can happen when this is painful for you, and attachment issues, and what does science say, and what's theology on this, all that's there for free for you, some videos if you want that. If you've got a loved one that you'd love to ask some questions about, you can click to request support on our changedmovement.com website. We have a blog called Love and Culture that you can access from there as well. You can read all the stories that are in our book. We have new testimonies all the time that we're posting on our website. please sign up for our newsletter. That's how we send out just really about one a month. We send a newsletter just to let you know what's happening in ministry. Here's a testimony or two. Here's what's happening in advocacy world as well. So you can do that there. And then the self-discovery book, if this is like how childhood shaped our sexual identity. So there's all kinds of reasons why you might want to take a glance at this little booklet. We put it together to show legislators in Washington the science and the testimonies that support that I wasn't born this way, things happened to me. And please don't take away my freedoms to get whatever kind of help I would like to have. But it's because there's all the scientific study in here and there's testimonies, it might be of help to. So there's an ebook that's free on our website too. Okay, so that's all my commercial announcement. No, actually it's not. This is the book that I wrote a couple of years ago. This is my journey out, the discipleship journey that the Lord led me on. So it's for the individual, but it also is helpful for, I think you guys your staff is reading it right now. It's a basic discipleship model that the Lord gave to me as he was leading me on my journey out. And so there's helps in there. I think it's helpful for people, whether it's your own or if you're caring for someone else, it could be of help. And then if for someone that's just needing a total handhold, please don't buy this for someone and say, hey, I think you need this. Those usually don't work out very well. But if it's somebody, it's like, I need to be discipled out and I want the help myself and all that, then I put together 50 videos and then a 330-page guidebook. So everything I wish I could have had. It's a teaching, and then it's the key scriptures that apply to that topic. There's like 50 different sections in here. The questions you should ask yourself, the activations where I could go experience that truth that the Lord is inviting me into, the whole thing, and then the video that corresponds. So there's like prayer times in there and stuff where I'm leading them through to forgive themselves or forgive the person that hurt them or that kind of thing. So if anybody needs that kind of a handhold, it's at the resource table back there later. Okay, that's the end of the commercial. So yeah, I'm going to just tell you, whoops, little sneak peek. All right, so we need to pause. I feel like I'm just saying a lot of things really fast at you. So I'm going to just give you a short version of my story. I'll tell a little bit more on Sunday morning. But you know, I had a great childhood in so many ways, and I think that's typical of people that experience an LGBTQ struggle. Is it can look like from the outside like things are okay, but sometimes there's an inner world going on that we don't learn about until they're 10 or until they're 40. You know, I mean it's just so customized to the person, depending on what's happened in their lives. And so I was raised in church. We were charter members of Prestonwood Baptist Church. We were there the first Sunday when I was 4 years old. There were 40 people there. And that was great. I mean, I met the Lord at an early age and wanted to please him and serve him. And then I was introduced to hardcore gay pornography when I was 8. Boys in a field. They open a boot box, and I am looking at things I don't understand. No one ever told me not to do this. Why would an 8-year-old in 1979 or 80, whatever, even need to be told to watch out for something like that, right? But there it was. And then I already had judgments against men because I was the skinny, scrawny, allergic shrimp, you know, and no boy sets out with that desire when you're little, you know, it's like, or ever. And so it was hard to keep up with the other boys. The girls were much nicer, much easier to talk to, much more accommodating. And so I started at an early age just kind of, I remember in second grade, I would not hang out with the boys and climb the jungle gym. I would walk with my pregnant teacher and several of the girls, and we would walk the perimeter of the playground because I could talk. I was called to be a pastor from birth, and it's like I could talk God bless her. She probably heard a lot more than she wanted to hear. And I didn't have to try to it wasn't a fight. I didn't have to fail constantly at whatever the boys were doing. And so I've got that going on. And then someone shows me, obviously I won't describe to you what I saw, but if you've never seen homosexual pornography, you probably have no idea what that looks like, but it's different than you would guess. It's probably a lot darker. It's probably a lot more violent and degrading than you would imagine. So I now lost even more respect for men, because why would anybody treat another person that way? And I can't explain to you what I'm talking about, but just take my word for it. It was degrading things, gross things. And so I was violated, and my image of what masculinity was marred even deeper. And so now that catalyzed some inappropriate touching and things like that. Those other boys acted that out on me. And so that's how my first exposure to sexual arousal, to sex at all, is at the hands of other boys, right? So there's cheering and all this hype over here saying that you're born that way, all that. Not me. I was wounded, I was exposed to things. I was violated. And every person I've talked to, and I've talked to hundreds, if I talk to them for 15 minutes, I hear one or two or three things where I'm like, wow, I wonder if there's something there, And sometimes it's hard, it's elusive, it's hard to see in a person's life, but I've never personally spoken with somebody for more than 15 minutes that I didn't start saying, wow, I wonder if the enemy capitalized on that in your life to bring wounding to you. But in any case, so by the time I get to be a teenager, I'm pretty broken. And because I know the Lord, I have conviction over what's right and what's wrong. And so now Pandora's box has been opened. It's hard to close sexual doors that have been opened without help, without the Lord's help, without a healthy church body to walk with you. And, this is 1980. Nobody talked about sex at my church. Nobody talks about sex at most churches, which is a big part of the problem. And so what do you do with this? I just knew I was bad. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have allowed that to happen to me. I shouldn't have looked. Why did I look at that? And other things happened as well, and, to wound me. And so by the time I'm in my teens, I'm taking on the manner of much more feminine than masculine. And then now that brings its own commentary from the outside, from, bullies and, all that. And so I saw myself as gay, when I was 15 or 16, for sure by then. And I'd had some interactions. This guy that was my closest friend never was going to do anything sexual. I was never going to do anything like that because it was sin. And I knew that was wrong. And I didn't want to offend God. And I did not want to do anything that God didn't want me to do. But he all of a sudden made advances at me. And as a teenager, being so deprived of healthy male-to-male interaction, I was starving for it, starving for it. I had pushed myself away because, in fact, I was born male. And if I shove masculinity away, that's confusing, right? If you're male and you shove your maleness away, who are you? Because, in fact, I was just trying to just be, all through my middle school year, or through my teens and a little earlier, I was just trying to be a person. I was like, I'm just going to be a person. Well, it turns out that doesn't work well, Definitely not in that day. There's attempts to try to make that work today, but those don't work very well. And so all this internal discord was going on all the time. And so the thing, what he was trying to rope me into and all that, and my giving into that a bit and all that, the guilt and shame was just intense. And family moved, separated us, and I was so relieved because I didn't have this compromise going on. But at the same time, my drug was taken away. The only way I knew who I was through him. That's not every case with homosexuality that it's codependent like that, but a lot of it is. More than not, in my opinion. And that's what it was. I didn't have a sexual problem. I had an emotional crisis going on. I had an inability to bond in a non-sexual, healthy way with other males. And so now, because of the things that happened to me in my youth, it's trying to be expressed sexually. So lots of pain. When I was 17 years old, I was so exhausted from trying to mind over matter my way out of feeling like I was gay, trying to be pleasing to the Lord, but feeling so ashamed that I couldn't take it anymore. I snuck into a Christian bookstore with a disguise on. I searched every resource I could find. There wasn't a single resource that offered me any hope to leave behind that life, that life or that struggle. And so my first moments of being suicidal was when I was walking out of the Christian bookstore. That's a pretty sad state of affairs, isn't it? And thankfully, I didn't want to destroy my family. I knew that it would destroy my family, There might even be some families here that have been through something like that. I hope not. But it's not that I didn't want to kill myself. I just didn't want to live anymore. Life was too hard. And so I finally, I wrote 9 pages of my pain and anger, vulgarity, just kind of vomited the whole thing out on 9 pages one night. Skipped school the next day, handed it to my youth pastor. And my youth pastor was like, well, we're going to tell your parents. And I was like, this is like the 80s. Where was it in culture, and definitely in the church, where, sure, bring us you're tired, you're poor, you're homosexual, and we're going to just work it out. Like, I had never heard a single thing like that. I've barely heard that today. And so that was, but I knew my parents loved me, and he said, we're going to tell your parents. I was like, he said, we are. I said, okay. And so my mom and dad and I cried for a couple of hours together that night as they were just grieved that I had been in that much pain in their home. And so I started seeing a Christian counselor who I saw weekly for 5 years. And so there are about half of the U.S. states right now have a, quote, conversion therapy ban for minors. So if you're a young person that's struggling and you want to not live an LGBTQ life, and you want help to, live more of a heterosexual life, it's illegal for anyone to help you with that. So it's specifically targeted counselors. And so I probably would have ended my life if those laws were in effect today, because I was not able to make it from minute to minute at that time. So I was 17 when that happened. And so thankfully that law was not there, so I was able to find a way forward. That from the minute I met with that counselor, while it did not address my sexual desires at all, I had hope. And I knew that I was not alone, and he cared about me, even though I felt like detestable and all of the rest. And so every week I had enough encouragement to keep going. But what happened for me was I had a physical illness, and a friend laid hands on me, prayed for me, and the 5-year illness left me when I was about 24, 25. That miracle got my attention, and I realized, oh my gosh, God is good. Because the way I got that physical stomach condition was by drinking 5 beers in 20 minutes and passing out in my fraternity. And I knew that was sin, and so I thought, well, God's not going to heal. I didn't know that God healed anybody physically, but I thought, well, I certainly didn't deserve it. And when he stepped over my sin and healed my physical body when I didn't think I deserved it, I thought, oh my gosh, he's good. And I did not know that. I've been saved since I was 8 and I had no clue. And so I thought, well, if he's good, and if he says that homosexuality is sin and he's good, if he says homosexuality is sin, and I now know that he's good, he must have a solution. He must have a way forward for me. And so I went on this journey to find out what would God offer to me in my broken sexuality. And so then, this person entered the picture. That's my wife, Tiffany. We've been married for, you mean this whole time I've been one slide behind? That's so sad. That's such a rookie mistake. This is my wife, Tiffany. We've been married for almost 17 years. And I'm just living a life I just never thought could possibly be possible. We have 4 kids together, and here's what they look like. Only they're about 10 years older than this now. I don't let people see their faces typically. I would let y'all, but I typically don't. I'm more careful about that. But anyway, I'm living a life I never dreamt possible, and I know a bunch of other people that have similar experiences to me. Also know a lot of people who don't. Also know a lot of people who are in a lot of pain over sexual identity, and they have not experienced the breakthroughs that I've experienced. And so that's why we do what we do, is to try to offer that kind of hope, encouragement, grace to all these people, because you guys see it. It's now not just a few people. It's also now a social contagion. And so there's a lot of people being swept into confusion over their identity that didn't happen to 10 years ago, But whatever was the catalyst to that, we want them to find freedom, and we want them to find peace, And if that means that they feel like they're heterosexual at some point and they get married and they have kids, awesome. If they feel like they're called to be celibate, awesome. If the point is being reconciled with Christ and being able to walk their lives out, following him, day to day, like any of us would do, and feeling good about it. So that's my story. I'm going to give at this point kind of a crash course on where I'm coming from, what I believe, so that then I can go on and say, okay, so now how do we handle these different scenarios? Sound good? Do y'all need to take a drink of water or fidget with something or something? Is everybody doing all right? Okay. So sex is sacred and it's beautiful. And it's a bummer that the church has been scared to talk about it. So I really admire you, Jeff, and the few pastors out there like you that say, no, this is God's thing, and we need to talk about it, Because I remember as a kid even wondering if sex is really okay, because when a kid learns about it, they're like, Daddy did what to mommy? You're like, what? And it's like, if the church never talks about it, how could it be good? I remember having that specific thought as a child, thinking, this can't be okay, or I would have heard about it at church. So I love it when churches are willing to talk about it. But, plenty of people are going to file me in the religious zealot, wacko category. I've been in that category my whole life, so I'm used to it. But all sexual behavior, not just homosexuality, all sexual behavior outside of a lifelong covenant of marriage between one man and one woman for life is sin, according to Scripture. And I just want to, and I will go into this more on Sunday morning, but a quick crash course. I want to give you this. So there are at least 6 different scriptures that specifically say that homosexual sex is sin in Scripture. But without focusing on those, where did I put that? Okay, you may not have noticed this before. So Matthew, if I take you real quick to Matthew 19, verse 3, says, some Pharisees came to Jesus, testing him and asking him, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason at all? And he answered and said, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? and said, "For this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." Isn't it interesting that they asked Jesus a question about divorce, and Jesus didn't answer the question really about divorce. He didn't even do what would have been traditional and for a rabbi to do and go and quote the law. He went back to creation. He went back to Genesis, which was unprecedented for a way for him to answer that question. And did you know that Jesus misquoted that verse? He actually misquoted it. That, if you read it from Genesis, that verse says, in the beginning made them male and female, and said, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and shall be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." He adds the word two. The two shall become one flesh. So Jesus actually takes the conversation and says, he has a different conversation and says, let me clarify exactly what marriage should look like. It is one man with one woman, and specifically those two paired together is my approved, life-giving representative of our relationship, being the bride of Christ, all that. He stipulates, let me be more specific about exactly what I'm condoning. So that's just one, and I'll talk about other things later. The Bible does, in every situation, in every place in the Bible where homosexuality is mentioned, it's mentioned in a negative light. There isn't a single positive note about homosexual behavior. There also is not any mention of gay sexual exchange or any, there's no story where Jesus, where it's accounted as something that God approves of. It's only condemned. I know this is heavy. But it is truth. Homosexual sex does not lead to procreation. So you're going to have to bring in the opposite sex from the outside in order to create a person, which means now you have altered God's original plan for family order. There are literally thousands of scientific studies that prove that children fare far better in a home with a male and a female as parents than they do with any other arrangement. Literally thousands of studies. Add to that, particularly with males, it actually is damaging to the physical body without going into any detail. Male bodies are not designed to interact that way, scientifically, biologically. So if you go and look at websites that are helping people walk that life, it's going to give you disclaimer after disclaimer of be careful about this, be careful about that. It's not beneficial to biological health. And there's a whole bunch of other things I could say about that. Also, I just want to clarify, there are two sexes. There's male and there's female, and that's not an opinion, that's scientific fact. So, and that's been the case ever since there was Adam and Eve, and they had offspring. From that day until now, there's only been male and female. There can be disorders of sexual development. There can be, just like any other, there can be genetic deformities, right? I could have been born with one arm, That wouldn't make me another kind of species. That wouldn't be an abnormality because we are born into a fallen world. And so, you'll hear arguments now for, a trans-identified person. It's like, there are people that have indistinguishable sexual characteristics, and that is true. It's about 1 in 100,000 where there's actually a chromosomal abnormality where they have to do deeper genetic testing to be able to say, okay, this is really biologically male versus biologically female at a chromosome. But still, they're going to be able to determine this is male versus female. There is not a third sex created. Let's see. So in 2019, Science Magazine published a study. It was a 30-year study that they took every single gene from 493,000 people and assessed the whole. So every gene in my body, 493,000 of me, okay? And they were looking for, is there a gay gene? And these are gay scientists, these are straight scientists, Harvard, MIT, Yale, top study, conclusively ruled there is no gay gene. There is no individual gay gene or genes. There is some very, very small heritability. Now this is starting to be over my head. We need a geneticist to tell you all the details. But there is some very small heritability correlated with homosexual orientation. But it's such a small amount that if we're going to say that people are born gay, then if you see someone smoking a cigarette, they were born a cigarette smoker. Because it's a higher heritability of cigarette smoking than it is with homosexuality. Same thing with a divorcee. If you've had a divorce, you were born a divorcee. So it's now that study conclusively did prove environmental factors are the bulk of what can be traced as influencing sexual orientation development. And I want to clarify this. Nobody should be getting their identity from their temptations, right? If you think about it, it's like I've been tempted to cheat on my taxes. That does not make me a thief. It's if I cheat on my taxes that someone could call me a thief. Do you know what I mean? And I think that applies here. And I want to clarify this too. The Bible does not call anyone. If you're studying the language, the original language, it's not going to refer to people as homosexuals. It is merely addressing homosexual behavior. Homosexual sex is what the Bible is speaking against. The Bible never the identity that the Bible uses is male and female. It's not using sexual identity. That's a construct from the 20th century or so. And I want to clarify that sexual attraction is not sin. Or at least there would be a lot of guilty people in this room, I'm guessing. Now, it's what we do with it, right? But just to be attracted, and I think that needs to be stated for when you're dealing with people, that it's like, well, if you do have someone in your life and they have some LGBTQ feelings and they're wanting to not live that out, and it's like, well, I was tempted again. Like, okay, so you were tempted. Okay, so God is looking at your heart, and all of us are tempted. It's what we do with it. And so, what I like to point out to people, lust is a sin. So the first glance or second, I'm not sin, but now when I'm saying, oh wow, let me check that out. Now I'm entering into lust, right? Or if I'm getting involved in sexual behavior, right? That would be sin outside of the marriage covenant, like I talked about. And I believe that, especially when we're journeying in discipleship with people, when I behave outside of what I have faith for, whatever's not of faith is sin. So there was a whole season of time for me where Netflix, well, they didn't have Netflix back then, but going to a movie or even watching TV for me for a season was sin, because that wasn't what God was doing in my life. God was trying to answer my prayers. And so if I'm like vegging out on things that are more fleshly, God knows I'm going to be triggered by these things, and I'm not ready for that. And so for me, it was I didn't have faith for that. I can watch some things now that I didn't watch then, but that's where sin enters in. So, and I want to say this: at its deepest level, in my opinion, homosexuality is an intimacy breakdown. It's not so much sexual; it's more emotional than that. It's an intimacy breakdown that the enemy capitalizes on. And there's a lot of different ways that happens to people. So if you were speaking to psychologists who were not, The APA, American Psychological Association, and the American Psychiatric Association have both caved to activist pressure decades ago. You need to know that. So you cannot trust that they share your core values or that they are honoring God's laws or God's directives. They literally caved to activist pressure 30, 40, even 50 years ago is when that began happening. So the fact that things are no longer considered a pathology is not because the brightest and best in psychology decided that that was the case. It's because they caved to activist pressure, and then they caved again, and they caved again, and they caved again. Abandoning an entire people group who needed their help. But those psychologists that have not followed that will tell you that it's an attachment issue. It's a failure to be able to bond. And trauma has happened. Gosh, this feels so heavy. I'm sorry, you guys. Are y'all okay? I'm running behind, but I'm going to catch up in Jesus' name. This is the same person. That's Kathy Grace Duncan on the left and Kathy Grace Duncan on the right. Our friend, she's our director of gender advocacy for Changed. And she's born female, but because of the way her father behaved inside of her home and the way that she saw that women were not safe, she wasn't safe and her mother was not safe. It did not make sense to her as a 4 or 5-year-old why she would be, is that me? It usually is. That's my ring. So, it did not make sense to her. Why would she be weak? Why would she be vulnerable? Right? We think, why would anybody want to identify as the opposite sex? It doesn't make sense if you don't have more information. When you hear her whole story, it makes perfect sense to me. It's like, I didn't want to be in danger of, I didn't want to be weak and a victim and all of that. And so she decided as a 5-year-old, I will be the man my father cannot be. And that affected her for years after that. She was leading the men's Bible study in her church because no one knew that she was female. And, but the Lord got a hold of her. That's a longer story. And she realized, wow, God has something different for me. And so that was 30 years ago that she left that life behind. That picture is, I think, 4 or 5 years. It took a few years for the hormones to leave her body. And she's a beautiful lady now. She leads women's ministry in her church fellowship. And is now, if you're paying attention or if watching any movies on the trans topic, you'll see her featured and stuff. And she testifies in legislatures and stuff, fighting for children to not be medically transitioned before they've had a chance for their frontal lobe to finish developing and they can make a life-altering decision as an adult instead of a child. But anyway, her story is amazing as well. We have a bunch of friends, fewer, but we have a bunch of friends similar to her story that they went through some kind of transition, and then the Lord has led them out of that. And beautiful people. All right, so let's talk about children. Do we need a break or anything? Are y'all okay? I can't tell how y'all are doing. Y'all look great, but some of you look like you just learned some things that were intense, which I think makes sense based on some of the things I shared. So the first thing I want to share is, and I mean this in the most gentle pastoral way I possibly could say it, but in order to help our kids, if you have a struggle, a vulnerability, an addiction, whatever, woundings yourself in a sexual, department, get some help. It's humiliating, I know, to ask for help, especially as an adult, or maybe as somebody that helps in your church, or is the leader of some ministry or whatever. But it is the door to freedom. and your life will get better. It will feel better then after you share that thing than you feel right now, pretty quickly right after that. And it then sets up you in alignment with what God's doing in your family and in your community and all that. And it allows you to get your voice back and to get back on the stage of your life and start bailing water for everybody else. Because guess what? Most people today have a struggle of some sexual thing. I mean, the stats of men that look at porn, those stats are staggering. We're talking 80, 90% inside and outside of the church. So definitely over 60%, but there are studies that indicate over 80%. So I'm going to encourage you. Yes, it's awful to have to admit things like that. It's horrible. Sin is always painful at some point. Just do it. Just rip the Band-Aid off. Go to find the safest person you know, a pastor here, someone that's going to handle your painful thing with care and love and grace. And do it for your sake, but do it for the sake of your family too. The best way that we connect with people is in vulnerability. It bonds people together. So the very thing that you think is going to disqualify you from being able to help your kid, because or whatever, it's like that could end up being the very thing that helps rescue them, is that at some point it's appropriate to have a conversation and say, I used to struggle with such and such too. And the Lord loves me and he's going to help you. So that would be point number one. Forgive yourself, but bring someone into it to help you do that. We're so divided today, and the enemy has worked so hard to separate all of us. But I realize I need more friends in my life. It's like I'm a senior leader of a ministry. I have 4 kids. It's like I was part of the men's purity group for all those years where I had every Monday night, I had these men and I was in their lives and all this. Well, I got so busy with my own ministry, I let that go. And I'm having to add relationships back into my life because they make me better. You pull the right people around you, and, it's like I haven't been given the mind of Christ. We have been given the mind of Christ. So I need God through you, and I need God through you, and I need, and I need just love. I just need a hug or whatever it is. And so we need each other, and we need real relationships where people actually know us, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So do your part to do that for yourself as well. And I'll say this, before we try to figure out how to help our kids, with their weakness or with their place that they need help with, back away and remember that God's parenting them as directly as you are. So become aware of what God. So it's very easy in these overwhelming issues in life that seem like, is there any way out? And I don't have the first clue where to begin and all that. It's like fear comes to just immobilize everybody. And so, and I am prey to this. I have to watch out for fear all the time. And it's like, go there with the Lord and be like, Lord, help me back away from the fear and the swirl and the pressure, and be like, okay, Lord, what are you doing in my daughter's life, in my son's life? Get his mind. Jesus only did what he saw the Father doing, and he only said what he heard the Father saying. So if we can understand that God has a specific plan for every one of our kids, and then partner with him in endeavoring to know what that is, it's going to be so much easier to know how to parent that child, even in issues of like sexual identity. Does that make sense? So I think we can be much more proactive and much more comprehensive if we're really being prayerful and mind of Christ over it first before we start, okay, now how am I going to practically, help with these individual pieces? I'll talk a little bit about kind of protecting kids from exposure today, because how do you do that in the 21st century with technology the way it is, and a screen on every wall and every place you look. First thing I'll say is, don't take any condemnation from this, because some people, it's like your kids are older or whatever, and so this counsel could have been helpful earlier. Be the first ones to talk to your kids about sex if they're young. We started talking to our kids about sex at probably 2 or 3 years old. Now, we didn't explain everything to them at 2 or 3 years old, but we started having conversations about, where did you come from? Daddy put a seed inside of mommy, and then you were born, and you start there, so that, because we tend to believe the first thing that we heard on something. Principle of first mention. And so if we can, we want to get to them first. We also demonstrate that we can talk about these things when we go first, right? Which, it's intimidating to talk about sex, with your children. Very few of us in here probably have an unblemished record in some department with sex, and so it's very easy to just let the church talk about it, or the pastor of this, or the sex talk at school, or whatever. That is not a good plan anymore. It might have worked at some point. Today, that's a real bad plan. So thank you for coming tonight. I need to be having this talk with all the people that didn't come. But anyway, we start with celebrating the two sexes, like with our little kids. It's like, isn't it awesome that God gave every kid a mommy and a daddy? Think about how, and I know there's families here where it's like we don't have a mom and a dad in the home and stuff like that, but you understand the principle, and no condemnation. There's a lot of reasons why a lot of us have different families, but we want to celebrate God's best plan, God's original design, and help kids understand the value of how God made females, and how He made males, and those types of things. And we can talk about the differences between, and no stereotype is going to fit perfectly, right? So it's like, daddy goes off to work, mommy goes off to work, but you just start having the conversation with them, and just talking it out with them. And then at the right age, when I'll talk about that in a second, we build compassion. So when we talk about the LGBTQ conversation, we only approach it with our kids with compassion. And honestly, that's the only way that any of us should approach it. Even when I'm testifying in Washington, D.C., or wherever it is, we only approach it with compassion, because we're not talking about a principle or something that happens in culture. We're talking about people. These are individual people in pain. And so we let, so it's like we could have had a conversation with our kids that said, you shouldn't have two dads. Or we could say, some kids aren't blessed like you are to have a mom and a dad. Some kids only get to have two dads. They don't get to have a mom. And wouldn't that be sad? Can you imagine if you didn't have mom and you just had me and another person like me? Like, oh my goodness, that, and we build that compassion so that they don't have to preach to their friend. They can love on their friend, that, and approach it hopefully with Jesus' heart, instead of preaching at someone for something they can't even control. You know what I'm saying? You may have to stand in the mirror and say penis and vagina several times in order to get yourself okay with talking about sex. Well, then do that. Or talk to your friend about it, or something like, how did you talk to your kids about, but it's just, we're the only ones not talking about sex today. Everywhere your kid turns, they are being told messages about it. So there was a time when maybe we didn't have to talk about it as much. Those days are at least 10 or 15 years past due. So practice. There are some books by, I think his name is Stanton Jones, brilliant guy, Christian, books called The Story of Me. You can Google it. There's 3 different books for kids. It's like age 3 to 5, and then like 6 to 9, and like 10 to 13, something like that. Those books do an excellent job of helping you understand kind of maybe what's age appropriate. What do you say about, and you just read it with them. They read along the book. I'm like, oh, daddy puts a seed into mommy. Oh, that's cool, And then when they're 6, they start, how did the seed get happened to mommy exactly? And then that book talks about that, that kind of thing. That could be helpful for you. I recommend having a conversation, no matter how old your kids are, have a conversation about what are you going to do when you see a sexy picture somewhere? What do you think you should do when you see somebody that doesn't have all their clothes on like they're supposed to? No, I don't know. I want you to come and tell me. You're not going to be in trouble. We're not going to be upset at you. Just sometimes, you can, just through different things or somebody's screen or something like that, a picture could pop up. We want you to just come tell us right then. And then we're going to help you with that. And that way, see how we're getting out in front of it? And then some of your kids hopefully then would say, well, actually, that's already happened for me. But that's a safe invitation for them to go ahead and tell you about it, right? They catch your tone. They're not going to be in trouble. You're not going to be kicked out, that kind of thing. Being vulnerable with your kids, obviously there's an appropriate amount and there's an inappropriate amount of being vulnerable with your kids. But I'm telling you, when you grow up in a home where people are not perfect and they can admit, well, daddy loses his temper sometimes, or, mommy, shouldn't have said that, or whatever it is, you actually are paving road in between you and your child that when they do something that they're not supposed to do, they will be able to travel that road without getting harmed or kicked out. Or does this make sense? So I'm telling you, be sensitive about it, but it probably does need to sting a little bit. Don't plant any ideas in their head of some new way they could go sin, but pick something that costs you something. Let them feel that you have made mistakes that were important before, and it didn't feel good to you, but you had a way forward. And now you don't have to live with that guilt or that shame anymore. I think that's one of the best things you can do for your kids. Model and discuss confession and repentance. To go ahead and pray, give them an example. When Daddy, did this, I had to pray for Jesus. And walk them through what that looks like, so they have this imprint in their mind on how they can confess their sins one to another that they may be healed. And now these are going to start to feel more random, but I want to give you as many little nuggets as I can, and then we'll do questions at the end. But be careful about sleepovers. If you knew how many of my friends, their first time they started feeling like they were, on the LGBTQ spectrum happened at a sleepover, it's a lot. So we're very, very careful about who our kids spend the night with. Because you got to realize it's not just the family that they're, first of all, you're going to be real surprised at who has pornography in their household. Of course, now it's on a phone, so it's not like it's harder to even quantify or all that. But anyway, it could be the friend of the brother of the kid that your kid is spending the night with that comes over with his phone. Do you know what I'm saying? And so, sex abuse, the stats of people who sexually abuse children, it's I think it's over 90% it happened to them as a child. So it's people replicating something that happened to them. The enemy is just passing along brokenness in that way. And so it can be shocking. You just would be surprised at where someone could be taken advantage of. So we do our best. We don't want to plant any ideas in our kids' minds, but we say things to them like, now, if you ever feel like anybody's not giving you enough space, somebody's too close in your face, or kind of their part of their body is getting too close to your body and staying there, that's a time when you just say, I need a drink of water. Or think about how you can, without being graphic and planting an idea, you can help them recognize danger on its way and make an exit stage left. Or, I don't feel well here, Mrs. Stevenson. I want to call my mom. I think I need to come home. I'm not feeling very well. And that's actually not lying, because you have something inside of you that's saying you don't feel well right now, don't you? Yes, I do. So you want to give your kids an opportunity to have that advance warning that so many kids have not had because the church didn't talk about it and their parents didn't talk about it. My kids know that at any point I can walk in and grab their phone and look at the search history. Like I do not abide by any rules of respect or anything like that when it comes to devices. I want them to know that this is not a private device, it's smart if you're going to have screens in your home, like have them in a common area if you can, so it's much less likely, especially if you get kids that are teenagers and things like that. That's a much longer conversation. But the best thing you can do is you are discipling your children. You are pouring into their relationship with God, and you are getting people in there as much as you can. You're helping put the people in their lives that are walking with God consistently, and are living righteously, and they have the best chance of issuing the invitations for evil that come. We're not going to be able to sanitize the world. Those days are gone. Now, should you get involved in finding out what books are at your school's library? You sure should. And you should make a big stink if they've got junk in there. And you'll have to and get a few parents to help you and go in there and make a big, be kind and honorable first and give them an opportunity to say, oh, so sorry. But if they don't, I would make a giant deal and get that out of there. Sex ed curriculum, I'm going to let you know that your school very well might tell you, oh, we don't have a sex ed curriculum. What they've done, though, is they've sprinkled it all throughout all of the learning. So it's not a chapter, it's not a week, it is the case study question in math, and it's things like that where it's like, well, the girl who now identifies as a boy, has 2 rocks and 3 sticks and, whatever. So I'm just letting you know. Okay. So intentional parenting. So be as present with your kids as you can. I mean, we live such busy lives, and there's so many distractions, and I do this as much as you do or more, and all that. But being present, slowing down, hearing them, eye contact is super important. Like the eyes are the window to the soul, and I believe when we are looking into each other's eyes, it's so different than if I'm talking this way. It's like you don't feel the same things from me when I'm looking straight at you, and we're connecting, and you feel seen, and you feel valued, and he's still looking at me, and it makes a big difference. And so really seeing our children and letting them feel seen and those types of things are just invaluable. Help your children bond with the same sex to the extent that you can. And some kids, there are different reasons why that's difficult for them, like it was for me. But if you're talking to the most brilliant minds right now, psychologists, psychiatrists on gender development and all of that, they're going to tell you that the ability to resolve conflict among same-sex peers is part of this equation. So, that was the case with me. You can go back and even the story that I told you and realize that I didn't want to have to compete with them, so I just exited stage left. Well, if someone had known and been able to help me, saying, okay, so now what is it specifically that's painful here? You think that you aren't as good at climbing the jungle gym. Well, let's find a way for you to have something else in common with Jim and with Kirk. And, that kind of, like if with a little bit of intentionality, you may be able to find some ways to create some group settings for your child among peers. It doesn't even have to be the same peers, but they need to start to understand that they can have mastery, particularly males, that they can have mastery over navigating those social situations with other males. There is an assertive, conquering side of masculinity that God created. It's not the only aspect of masculinity, and it should be honorable, and it should not oppress. But we are different, and we do have, women are able to nurture in ways that, in my opinion, men can't. They're wired to give nurture, even in their own physical bodies, that men don't do. And so we want to help. It's not about driving a truck. It's not about being on the football team. It's about being able to feel like I can hold my own as a man among men is part of this equation. As a woman among women. Men have the wrestle with, do I have what it takes? Women have the wrestle with, am I beautiful? So, she may not be Barbie. Who cares? Does she feel attractive? Does she feel like a prize? Does she feel, because she is one. God doesn't create anybody who's not a prize. And so, but that needs to happen within community as well. It's the inside job, but we are socialized into much of our identities. And so addressing social situations is part of this equation. So even if you do have a traditional family, you've got mom and dad and kids, your kids ideally still need role models and mentors, or spiritual moms or dads or uncles or aunts that are following the Lord, hearing God on behalf of them, having them in their lives a little bit, where they just go get a snow cone with them, or they're playing basketball in the backyard or whatever. That sense of, I am not alone, but I have other men and other women who see me and value me and are speaking into me is important. And definitely, if you've got a broken home where you don't have a member, you don't have maybe dad in the picture, then an uncle or the guy that is the greeter at church who is friendly, and finding a way to make some kind of connection there for your son or something like that. Just those social interactions. This is an intimacy problem, and you don't get over an intimacy problem alone. You're going to have relationships, as part of this equation. Relationships with God, but relationships with his people. And then you need a healing, for people that are, to help people overcome brokenness in their sexuality, you need inner healing modalities. So, that may come from a counselor, a pastoral counselor. It could come from just a person with a gift of counsel. We all know those. Like, they have no formal training, they just have great counsel. It could come from a psychologist, but just be aware, most psychologists are going to give exactly the opposite counsel that you would want on this topic. What was such a huge part of my journey was inner healing ministries. Like Bethel has our Sozo ministry. My close friends, Lori and Barry Byrne, who are also at Bethel Church, they have a ministry called Nothing Hidden Ministries. It's a $3 app on your iPhone. You download it. It's inner healing tools on there. They are brilliant. But basically, is that my next slide? It's not, but it's not what happens to us, it's what the enemy says to us when something happens to us that sends us down a wrong track, right? So you can have multiple people that experience the same tragedy, and you'll see one that tanks after that, and another one that seems to go off free. Why is that, right? In my opinion, a lot of times it's because of what the enemy said to this person, and how that it implanted a lie, and it became a belief in a way that they see the world. I remember another time I was exposed to porn as about an 8 or 9 year old, and this girl that saw several kids looking at Playgirl, Playboy, and we were all looking at both of them, and so I happened to be looking at Playgirl for a second, and she goes, "Oh, so you like the men?" And I remember this arrow going in as if, oh my gosh, well, I guess I was looking at that for what, is there something, I guess there's something wrong with me, right? I don't know what would have happened if she hadn't said that, but when the enemy speaks like that, if I don't rip out that arrow or realize that there's an arrow, I live decades with a deception that may have never been true. And so we need access to inner healing modalities where we can say, okay, so so this is what we do all the time. It's like, okay, so when did you first start feeling this way? It's like, well, sometimes it's easy to find and sometimes not. It's like, oh, my goodness, that happened. Okay, let's pray together and let's ask the Lord, what did the enemy tell you when that happened? And some of those things are mind-blowing, how this traces back to something that the enemy said about their identity or about who women are or about who men are or about what sex is when that hard thing happened for them. And they see the world differently. And so then if they were headed this way, they head this way. And you go 10, 20, 30 years, and you have a pretty different life than where you were headed. I feel like I am just bombarding you guys. So I'm going to talk in a second and get into the practicals of, okay, how can we actually help people that are looking for help? But before I say that, so I've already said this, but our deepest needs really with this are intimacy and identity. Those are the crux of what this stems from. And I want to be real clear, like when we're trying to help someone that wants help, when we try to help people that don't want help, that's called witchcraft or control is maybe the polite way to say that. But and I understand that's a little different. When you're talking about your children, you are trying to train up your children in the way that they should go. But when someone already has a bent in their mind, in their heart, to feel a certain way, if you're already having sexual arousal of a type of flavor or something like that, it's going to take a lot more than mind over matter to shift that. We're talking about, this is programming, this is imprint, stuff has already been imprinted in here. And so getting frustrated with someone, like, well, why would you, I mean, if y'all know the ridiculous things I've heard over 50 years, you would probably laugh out loud. It's like, well, she's really hot. Like, you should just look at her. Like, thanks. I'm all better. Great. Or, you should just fool around with, a pastor told me that one time, you should just fool around with one of the girls in the youth group. I was like, a great counsel. Did you choose your sexual desires? Like, did you one day get into a line and said, yes, I'll take that, please? And you try to change your sexual desires. Just feel differently. Go. It's like, come on. Slow down enough to get inside of their mind and think about what counsel you're giving. If you slow down for a minute, you're like, well, it's going to be pretty unlikely that they just have been thinking this through wrong. No, our sexual desires emanate from a deep place, and we find ourselves with an attraction. And so much harm has been done, particularly from the church. Well-meaning people or well-meaning pastors even, trying to help people that are looking for help, that are focused on trying to turn somebody into a heterosexual, okay, when it's an intimacy problem. So we need to address more specifically the wound. They don't have a problem that they're not wired heterosexual. The problem is there's brokenness in their intimacy, in their ability to bond with other people of the same sex in a non-sexual way. They don't see themselves the way that Jesus sees them. Kathy Grace, the lady who lived as a man, she needed to be someone to come in and say, not all men are like your dad. Let's talk about that. You must have been very scared. What was that like to live in your home with him acting like a monster? And get in there and let her deal with that pain that has been unaddressed for all those years. Let her have an opportunity to see men through a different light, because the representative for maleness in her family was a monster. So, do you see what I'm saying? If the goal is we got to change your sexual desires, we are going to completely miss God on it. God is over here caring about the whole person. He's caring about the brokenness, the pain, the lies. He wants to bring freedom. And so often we find that when the Lord gets invited into enough things and is given permission, and this person has a willing heart to follow him and serve him and all that, then it's like you turn around and you're like, that's what happened to me with Tiffany. It's like I'm at the young adults group one night, which I'd been getting to know her for a year, and it's like she was sitting over there. She had long hair, and she had this sparkly belt on. She looked, when she was 27, she was dressing like she was a middle schooler, which I thought was very fascinating. And she was like playing with her hair and stuff. She's chatting with a friend, and I just was like, wow, I just thought, wow, and then I looked over here, I wanted to look back, and I'm like, oh my gosh, she's really stunning, and I had never had that happen before as a 30-year-old, had never had that happen before. I was captivated by her, but that happened as a result of a years-long journey of finding out first who he is. We see ourselves best by looking at him. We're made in his image. Elizabeth, my ministry partner, she accidentally left lesbianism behind. Accidentally. Long story short, she was Presbyterian and believed that homosexuality was okay with God. And she completes seminary and then meets this guy. He invites her to his charismatic church. She goes in. She said it was a Presbyterian's worst nightmare. She said it was like people were bodies on the floor, crying, laughing. Who knows what that person's doing? Like, she's like, what is going on? 17-year-old boy walks up, says, I have a word from the Lord for you. And she was like, is that Swahili? You have a what? And he said, yeah. And he read her mail. He told her the thing that she'd been crying out to, the cry of her heart for the Lord for the last several years. He called that out, and she thought, oh my gosh, if God knows specifically who I am, I have no idea who he is, even with her seminary degree. And so she realized, oh my gosh, he can be known. I must know him. She got a brand new Bible and a highlighter, started at Genesis again, simply looking for what is the character of God? Who is he? Before she got to Revelation, she was so changed by having stared at him and his goodness that she found herself being attracted to this pastor that had invited her to his church. And she was humiliated to realize she was sexually attracted to him because she was a lesbian feminist who had a lot of ideals about how bad men were. And now she's attracted to him. What are we going to do about that? So she's been married to him for 17 years. And yeah. But we're going to not mishandle people when we understand the goal is getting them connected. I mean, spirit, soul, and body, the deepest parts of them, fixated onto the author and finisher of their faith. It's a discipleship journey in a healthy group of people, that believe that God can do anything for people. That is the recipe. The church is the solution to this. Psychologists can help if they're not taken over by the Borg. But, but it's the church that's going to bring the healing. So let me try to crash land this plane in 5 minutes and then let y'all ask questions. So here's some practicals. So the 3 A's. I stole these from Joseph Nicolosi, who is an amazing psychologist. He's in heaven now. His son has taken over his ministry. But anyway, attention, affirmation, and affection. This is an intimacy problem. This is how you reach these people. Focused attention, affirmation, not cheesy affirmation, not general affirmation, not you're so awesome. What does that mean? What does it mean that you're awesome? Why are they awesome? Tell them that, and affection, so appropriate, non-sexual affection. I try as best I can to be touching my kids all the time, hugging on them, giving them a kiss, patting on the head, stroking their back. I try as much as I can to be touching my kids. Help them feel deeply valued and uniquely known. I think that's what intimacy is. I think that's another way to say it, is when I feel deeply valued and uniquely known, right? Like your best friends are the ones who, they know what you're going to say before you say it. right? They know how you're going to react to this thing that happened because they just know you. We want them to feel that way. Expressing interest in their deepest self. So someone that does come to you and says, if you have a child that is struggling, you may not have, they may not be looking for help from you, and I realize that. And that's why this is a much longer conversation. But you don't want every topic to be about this, We're much broader people than that. We have a lot more to us. And so you want to express interest in what matters to them, right? That's going to bond you and show them that you are in their corner, that you care about what matters to them. So talk about things that are in line with that. Model intimacy with God yourself. That's going to be the best. I believe the best ministry is accidental, really. It's just unintentional. I'm walking with God. I'm endeavoring. He's speaking to me about things, including you, because I'm near you. And I just share something like, oh, that means so much to me. Like, oh, that was from the Lord. We just didn't identify it as that, And so growing yourself in intimacy with the Lord, and then helping this person, if they're wanting it, to sharing the wisdom that you know, about what does it look like to grow in your relationship with the Lord and to grow in understanding of Scripture and prayer and everything. Some of the best help I received was from my mentor. He became a spiritual father to me, and he just would sit with me every Saturday for coffee for about for about an hour and a half. He would sit there and just talk, and he would just listen. And then he would reflect back to me through a godly lens. So whether I was confessing sin or whether I was just sharing my perspective on life or offering some pain, or he'd be like, you know what the Lord, how God sees you, Ken? He made you this way. It was Scripture, but it was also him having a fatherly lens for me, reflecting God. And so he would say, you know what, boy, the way you exhibited courage the other day, that was such a, and don't make it all talking about masculine or feminine or that, but there were times when he would say, that was such the way you covered that lady the other day when that thing happened over there and you spoke into that was just such a fatherly thing that you did, or such a masculine way that you covered him and her and that family. And gosh, I feel like the Lord just loved that so much. And he just kind of was present and in my life to reflect back to me how God felt about me. And it gave me permission to consider myself to be a man. Because all these things from my childhood caused me to either reject it or feel like it was too hard, it didn't fit me, I wasn't adequate. And he undid a lot of that just because he was discipling me. And he was a man. Like when a man, I know a lot, most of my examples are men. Most all this applies, equally to females. But, when a man gives you sustained eye contact and hears you and remembers what you told them last time and follows up, you feel valuable. And you feel valuable as a man because this isn't a mixed group. It's a man sitting under an older man. Do you know what I'm saying? It healed me. When someone does dare to put these precious pearls, in front of you of this is how I see myself, or this is my struggle, or whatever it is, someone comes out to you. This is a very delicate moment. And if you don't like the way you handled that moment, you are okay. There is forgiveness. If it may not need to be something to be repented of, you may not have known how to handle that. And that is okay. God understands. But proactively, if you find yourself in this moment, this is a moment to just let the person fall over onto you. And you're going to keep them from hitting their head on their way down. This is not a moment for truth. This is not a moment for learning anything. This is a moment for you to learn something. you're learning what matters to your child. And they are learning whether you will be a safe place for them to process anything else with. That's all that should be happening there. There will be plenty of times later for you to share what you think. They probably already know what you think. So, yeah, you're their parent, but this is a very vulnerable moment. And so, how you handle that, so poker face, it's like, okay, so you slept with 4 people yesterday, okay. Well, how are you doing right now? Really, or crazier things, that how you handle this moment, your body language is going to tell them whether they can tell you anything else, or if they're going to have to go to someone else about that. Keep in mind, there is no more affirming place on the planet than the LGBT community. So the church is the best place, it's the healthiest place and the safest place. It's not the easiest place, because if I go over to LGBT community, I don't have to change anything about myself. I only get affirmed. If I'm going to drive right over a cliff, they're going to affirm me. Do you see what I'm saying? We're competing with that. Now, we have way better tools. We have solutions that actually where we have the God of the universe on our side. But in those moments, it's the moment to be gracious. And then just, you want to say things, wow, how did that feel? Because you automatically have a running tape in your mind of all the things you're going to need to address now based on what they just told you. There's time to address that later. But in that moment, it's your chance to say, wow, is there anything else you want to, do you need to get any more pain out? Like you must have felt very misunderstood living in our family and feeling the way that you felt. Is that true? Or have you felt hopeless? Forget all of the practicals and get into this is a person's vulnerable heart. Let me help them get the pain out and feel safe here. We already talked about arousals don't define us. So much healing is found and if the person's looking for it, by not praying, Lord, take this away, the Lord doesn't really answer that prayer. Maybe he will in some cases. But again, this is there's brokenness, there's pain underneath. So rather than Lord saying, yep, snap, you have different desires, the Lord wants to heal what caused that. And so we need to ask the Lord, why? Lord, what? Like with Kathy Grace, when did you first start feeling this way? Okay. Why do you think you felt that way? Well, I don't know. I was scared of my dad since. Okay, so let's invite the Lord into that. It's this. We're trying to come to understanding about what has happened and what the Lord's heart is on it, and what work the enemy did, and do that. And so we do a lot of asking the Lord, why? Help me understand, Lord. Don't just do this thing I want you to do, Lord. Help me understand as a practitioner of healing what has happened, and then we move from there. When the person does open up, I'm listening for deceptions and for pain and for trauma. That's what I'm listening for. Hopefully I just hear directly from the Lord whatever he's saying. But you know what I'm saying? Like you'll notice when you're walking with somebody, they'll repeat something. Like they'll say something, well, but when men just don't ever really turn out the way you think. And you're like, the second time they say that, you're like, oh, that's actually a belief in there. Something happened. Well, the Lord is going to want to address that at some point. So you're listening for anything like that kind of trips your radar as to, oh, I don't believe that, or I don't think God believes that. And those are areas where the Lord can come in and bring healing. But those times when they're sharing, it's tempting to want to fix it. But usually asking more questions and reflectively listening is because this needs to be usually this is a discipleship journey. God, I know of 2 people who the Lord touched them in a worship meeting, one in particular I'm thinking of, and she never struggled with same-sex attraction after that, after a decade of living that life. But often it's a discipleship journey, and so we're wanting to walk with them, and so conversation, listening is the best road. The next one, speaking truth. Obviously, that's part of discipleship, was we tell people the truth, right? Jesus seemed to tell people the truth after he demonstrated love a lot in a ministry situation. So, the woman caught in adultery or things like that. Like, where are your accusers? Showing you I'm not going to condemn you, and so like that. And then he says, okay, go and sin no more. But when we as a church, so one of our failures can be hitting people over the head with truth before they are convinced that I love them. And those don't work out well on this topic for sure. So, again, I'm a truth person. I love to just declare truth. And I've done it many times out of season. So I'm throwing myself under the bus right along with you. But I'm not speaking at you something I'm not telling to myself. I'm just saying, do people need to hear the truth? Absolutely. Not before they're convinced that you're in their corner and that you love them, whether they take that truth or not. Do you know what I'm saying? Reinforcing their identity in Christ. It's like that's what you want to eventually be happening. Again, they have to want it. But even if they don't want that one, there are different ways that if I am connected to God's heart for a person, I'm going to be able to say things that reinforce how God sees them, just as I do life with them. Like, gosh, man, that was so awesome that you could have really just laid into that guy and you just showed him so much grace. Well done. I know that really made God smile to see how you just handled that. And 1,000 different examples that affirm who people are. And I mentioned this already, but in encouraging pursuit of multiple in particular same-sex peers and mentors. We need that because, especially if you have a child that's not wired like you want them to be able to see a godly representative of a man or woman, whichever sex you are, or that they are, that might be a little bit more clothes that they could wear than maybe the ones that you wear. Now, some of our kids are a lot like us, and other ones is like, where did you come from? So that's another benefit that you get from trying to have the body. That's what we need the body of Christ for. The church community should offer being seen by these different ones. Okay, so I gave a lot less time for questions than I planned, but I don't have to jet out, but I can take some questions. Yeah, you guys, I feel like I've just beaten you up for 2 hours, but anyway, you're still here, so that's encouraging. Yes, sir. Thanks, man. I appreciate it very much. Thanks for being here. Yes, ma'am.
Can you help us understand the mindset of those that have grown up in the church, maybe are still in the church, go to seminary,
Yep.
and still believe that their lifestyle is according to God's plan, they remain that way.
Yep.
And like your thing up there says help give freedom. They're like, well, I don't need help, and I've got freedom when I came out.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
what is that mindset? Just help us understand that.
There are just so many voices in culture today, for one thing, right? And there are, there are plenty of Christians, like people that claim to follow Christ, that have interpreted Scripture differently. And it costs less, at least in the short term. It was more costly for me to adhere to a traditional view of Scripture than it would have been to just throw myself into what my temptations were luring me toward. You know what I'm saying? So there's that element that it's like, well, if someone is claiming to be a Christian and is opening up theology and saying, actually, the Bible didn't mean this. When it says homosexuality, it's only talking about temple prostitution. It wasn't really referring, that kind of thing. That's very tickling ears-ish, because it's like, well, that doesn't cost me what I feel drawn to. And now, in social media and people, there's the way we're bombarded by messaging now. the enemy has really done a great job of pulling people in in different directions. So I understand how people, it's like, it is, again, this is why the church needs to be talking about this. Again, it's why people like me that have a testimony where the Lord has met us need to be sharing our testimonies, because what you hear is the other stories. You don't hear. And of course now, I am shadow banned on social media. If I post something 4 years ago, thousands of people responded. If I post something now, 4 do. So I am intentionally sanctioned because of my messaging by social media, big tech. So and my friends too. So it is hard to get the message out there that offers something redemptive. Add to that, there's a lot of the church that doesn't have experience with seeing anybody experience a significant shift in their desires. And so they feel unfair encouraging people. It feels unkind to say, well, you must be celibate or something like that. They're like, there's been so much pain and mixture for so long that we've lost a lot of ground. But, in my opinion, Scripture is, if anybody really wants to go go understand all the theology, by Robert Gagnon's book. I always know the title, and it's escaping me right now, but it's the Bible and Homosexual Practice, I think is what it's called. Gagnon, Gagnon, Robert Gagnon. He is the gold standard on that. He is a very well respected theologian. So even his opponents, who take the opposite side, say, yeah, he knows his stuff. I don't feel like I answered it very well for you, but do you have a follow-up to that? Okay. Yes.
I hear a lot these days people say stuff like, oh, that's so gay, he's so gay, you're so gay, I can tell. And
Yeah.
calling out characteristics as though they're gay.
Yeah.
How harmful is that, and what should we do in that case when somebody's saying that about somebody?
Yeah, harmful. It's very harmful. Yeah. Can you give me a little bit of context, like what type of a setting would that happen in, you think?
Well, just out and about a public space.
Mm-hmm.
People watching, and you see somebody, oh, they're gay. And it's almost
Yeah.
like I know how to come out of a crowd.
Yeah.
But then also,
Yeah.
even among students, like
Mm-hmm.
they do something, oh, that's gay.
Mm-hmm. If I had any relationship with them, I think I would be asking questions, be like, hey, have you thought about what you're saying? Like, do you think that really is? Do you think God would be saying that? Like, do you think that being haphazard with throwing out identities at people in front of other people is something that you should be doing? Would you want somebody to just take a glance at you and start saying in front of others what your identity is? Like, we don't actually know. I think you're being a little bit cavalier with people's lives, and their reputations, because in today's culture, that could be a compliment to call someone gay, or it could be a slur. I don't know. Either way, I think when you're talking about, I think it's an opportunity for us to reinforce in those, whoever that would have been that was doing that, the sacredness of our identity. God forms us specifically, and so I think it's just unwise to be being cavalier with who someone is probably what I would do. Yes?
What about young kids in toys?
Yeah.
Kids dressing up like
Mm-hmm.
like a woman. Like,
Yeah.
I've had my kids, and sometimes I'll say things like, "That's actually not how
Uh-huh.
we dress."
Right.
But I've heard a lot of kids say, "Well, I grew up playing with Barbie dolls."
Yep.
And my parents just kind of, how do we address that?
Yeah. A lot of times there's a reason. So I think it is unwise. It's unwise to overreact and be like, oh my gosh, It's also unwise to not react at all if it just kind of becomes something that kind of starts happening repetitively. The best wisdom I've come across on that is typically to try to get down there with the child and start playing with them and start figuring out what it is that's drawing them into thinking that that's interesting. Sometimes it's, a dramatic example would be the little boy lost his mother to a car wreck, and he's wanting to identify with the feminine again because he lost his mom. It could be things like, that's an extreme example, but that type of thing is not unusual. There's some practical reason that they're feeling a draw toward that, and it's not because they had a gay gene. So trying to find understanding, like, hey, tell me about, you start pretending with them, it's like, well, you walk in as a different character, or maybe you come in as a female, I don't know. Experiment and invite the Lord into your trying to understand where this is coming from. Those are the stories that seem to work out the best that I hear about. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So speaking about the genes in the article that was up there,
Yes.
and that there is no gay genes. On the opposite side of that, is there a straight gene?
I don't feel like I'm scientific enough to know how to answer that. I think that our biology is set up such that it's all built on the foundation of there's two sexes, and so and that the only thing that can create the propagation of the human race is when male chromosomes interact with the sperm and the egg come together, male and female coming together. And so I don't know is the best answer, but I kind of feel like the whole all of our genetics are predicated on an understanding of sexuality is two coming together to form new life. And so homosexuality isn't baked into it, but heterosexuality is. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Can you touch on how we need to be communicating with our culture as far as like what terminology we use,
Yeah.
pronouns, how do we?
Yeah. Yep. I think that the type of relationship that we have with the audience we're talking to should be respected, because I think we have very different, probably in a lot of different areas of life, we have different conversations with people based upon how close we are to them and what my authority level is with them. And I think that's super important particularly in a situation. So and this is Ken's opinion, but if I pull up in the line at Starbucks and I'm speaking to, a man who's dressed as a woman, and they want me to refer to them, not that usually happens, but, if there's an expectation for me to use their female-sounding name or her, I'm going to respect that because we have no relationship. And I think it's a little strange when we're going to consider that to be a teaching moment when I don't even know them. It's a little that's a little beyond reasonable to me. If it's if it's someone I'm close to, the best counsel I can maybe even find y'all a link that you could watch. Like my friend Kathy Grace, I asked her all these questions, and how she answered it was incredible, because she was saying, when someone is telling you what they expect you to do as far as referring to them, if your heart's right, then it's a great moment into getting to know them better. And so, to say, well, wow, okay, so you're wanting me to call you Kathy. Tell me about this. This is a big deal. How long have you felt this way? So instead of just dealing with just the question that came before you, this is actually an opportunity to demonstrate that you're one of the people that actually is going to care about them. And at some point, you may have to answer that question, but if you get to have a meaningful conversation, sensitively, of course, and you are out for that person's best interests, right? Like you care and you love the Lord and you care for this person, then they're going to feel that. And then you can then have a dialogue and say, my goodness, this seems like a really deep conviction of yours that you're asking me, right, to refer to you this way. You know, I also have some really deep convictions, like due to my faith and my relationship that I have with God. Actually, that runs, I don't know if it's the same as what you're experiencing, but it runs really deep in me. And that causes me to have some different beliefs too. And is there a way we could go down the road together with not expecting either one of us to abandon these deep convictions, you know, because I really want to honor you and I really want you to feel safe with me. I also, though, have to go figure out kind of, you're the first person actually I've been close to that's telling me a story like this. Can you give me a little bit of time to kind of understand how I can honor you in line with how I feel about you and still have the kind of some of the values that I have? You know, just kind of some of those practical conversations, you know, that we have so much better when we are when we're caring for their emotions. We're caring for the thing underneath why they asked me that. Does that make sense? And I know this is not easy. This is real tricky stuff. But I think that's the right path, is not just, well, I'm going to give an answer to the question, am I going to stick to my religious convictions, or am I going to abandon them here? I don't think that's the conversation that God's having there. I think that's a fool's errand. I think it's like, oh my goodness, we have in front of us a person in a lot of pain. How am I going to care for this person? How am I going to live my life such that at their darkest day, they're going to call me first? You know, does that make sense? Yeah. Yes, sir.
I grew up in Africa, and
Yeah?
I spent 21 years of my life over there. I went from all boys high school, and that state is really westernized.
Yeah.
But I didn't know even one single gay till I came to America.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I don't know. What's that?
There was porn in high school.
Yeah. But you didn't, not homosexuality. Well, doesn't that tell you something? I mean, I think that's a learning point for all of us. That's another evidence that it's not genetic. Like, this is not biology, this is environment. And so, I mean, when you have, I mean, y'all, I know a lot of people now who their first LGBTQ type feelings happened in their 40s. I was working with a guy a couple of years ago. His very first homosexual desires happened in his 50s. And, you know, he had gotten into a worse version of porn after his divorce with his wife. And the things that he got exposed to seeing in there, it lodged in here. And then fear came and made him afraid that what if and next thing you know, he has desires that direction. And now it's messing up his relationship with his new wife. And so what we're exposed to and what our culture is embracing affects us. I mean, I think also, you know, if enough people give themselves to a way of believing and behaving for long enough, the enemy has greater authority there. Even in that geographic region. And so, I mean, I think the Bible talks about like principalities and powers and different levels of demonic spirits. And America has gone that way. I mean, I think the church missed its exit 50 years ago as far as being able to minister to these people as opposed to picketing these people. And so, and I'm not, you know, I'm someone who loves the church. Please don't get me wrong. But I think that we are living out some of the ramifications of not stepping in with God's heart a long time ago. and he's going to redeem it, but there's a mess in the meantime. I've heard stories like that specifically of people from Africa telling me the same thing before. Where in Africa? Oh, yeah? Yeah, okay. I just got an invitation to Nigeria, which I've never been to before. I don't know how close that is to Nairobi. Is that pretty far? And I've been to Sierra Leone a bunch of times. Sierra Leone is one I have a big love for, but it's nice to have you. How long have you lived here? 15 years. Yeah, okay. He's a Texan now. Okay. You can be African and Texan. You know. Yeah.
Spent a lot of time listening, but I've also been spending a lot of time trying to mull my questions around. So I'm not willing to get one here.
Yeah.
You've talked a little bit about societal influence on things right now. I don't know if you're familiar with the Arizona Christian study from last year that suggests that nearly 40% of Gen Z has proclivity towards LGBTQ.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a, not to say a breaking point or a critical mass for this? You know, you also mentioned things like going to school boards and being active about what's in libraries and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. I would argue it goes much deeper than that with what's in the curriculum and people that are actually, teaching
Oh,
in the
definitely.
classroom and all that. Not to say that we shouldn't be a light to the community, but in what capacity should we be thinking about how the church is positioned against a lot of this?
Mm-hmm.
There's a point in being active and being a voice, but we also should, in some ways, be protective of our own culture. And
Mm-hmm.
we're going to get absorbed by this a little bit. We've seen it as, again, we've also heard, that there's presence of this in certain denominations in Christianity.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess ultimately where our question is landing is, how do we get to the root of a lot of what you're seeing? Where should we be putting up,
Mm-hmm.
our last guard, or where should we be, and maybe the answer is the family. I guess that's where I'm coming to a lot of this.
Yep.
So try to put a fine point on it, because I landed like you did. What exactly should be our priorities in moving forward
Mm-hmm.
so that we are protecting our families from being
Mm-hmm.
influenced by a culture around us that is preaching acceptance in all things, no matter how bad they may be?
Mm-hmm. I just like you just from the question. Like, you think like I do and care about what I care about. I think you nailed it, family. But I would say specifically, we need strong men and we need strong women. Godly, strong men and godly, strong women. We have got to raise up banners high and clear of what it means to be a strong man of God and what it means to be a strong woman of God, a beautiful woman of God. Like, because the fanfare, what's up in lights, for anybody that is confused about identity or feels disenfranchised or whatever, they are opening the door, LGBTQ, we accept you just as you are, come right this way. And they, God bless them. In their wounding, in their efforts to not ever be rejected the way they felt rejected or not let you ever feel rejected, are going to start telling you who you are, and they're going to be bullying you without knowing it. You know what I mean? The same things that they get mad that someone did to them, they're now doing it unawares. And so we get behind men's, start your own or build your own bigger. It needs to look like something to be a kind, valiant man of God with standards. And it needs to mean something for women to do the same and to love extravagantly and to have a backbone and to, be intentional with life and intentional with my family. Like, we need a grassroots movement like that in churches all around the world having these conversations. Because right now, what's unclear is what it means to be a Christian and what it means to be a man or a woman. What's clear is to be LGBT. Yep. Yes?
Piggyback on your answer to his question, but first, I'm going to guess you know Jonathan Keller.
I do. He's a good friend of mine.
Okay, yeah, I work for an organization. Virginia is similar to Jonathan's, so know Jonathan really well.
Oh, that's cool.
So
Which conference are you going to?
It's a family policy council conference.
Yeah, we'll probably be there, but go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, South Carolina?
I don't know where it's going to be. It's not me that's going, but yeah.
Okay, yeah, that would be cool. We, talking about men's ministry and women's ministry, I think we have let the culture even tell us what masculinity is.
Yep.
And femininity is.
Yep.
And I think we've, in a way, that's hurt our, how we reach kids, and particularly teenagers.
Yeah.
And we've talked a lot about kind of younger, right, and developing early and then afterwards, but teenagers right now
Uh-huh.
are getting obliterated
Yes.
by this issue, and it's their friends, right? And we can say it's out there, but Christian school, in
Oh, it's everywhere.
everywhere,
Mhm.
they're getting it. Speak to us, dads,
Mhm.
a little bit
Mhm.
about, how to intervene, how to help them navigate that
Mhm.
when their friends are
Mhm.
influencing them, or they're seeing it, they don't know how to respond. How do we help even our teenagers respond to their friends?
Yeah, I'll be honest. Did I just, can you hear me? Maybe, battery might.
Gosh, I don't feel like I can answer that question as well as I want to because I feel like I'm still a student, and that my kids are just starting to enter their teens. And so I hope to be able to answer that better 2 years from now than I can right now. But, we need rite of passage type things for women and definitely for men. And I think that actually could be done without changing a whole lot of things. I think it's just small groups of men come together in church settings, figuring out how they're going to bring the young men along and go do something with them. It probably needs to not be one flavor. So it could be camping one time. Another time it might need to be arts and crafts, or it might need to be, you got to figure out your group of who you're trying to influence and lead so that it feels like all of them have an on-ramp, because the rough and tumble ones need one thing, but the ones who are designers need something else, Hopefully they get to the camp out at some point, but they may not be able to start there. So just having the men, healthy men in the church, seeing them and coming together to figure out what can we do with the people we've got with that right here to show them that they do have what it takes. So it needs to be challenge I'm sorry, I'm not as much the expert on with women, but for men, they need to know, they need a challenge, but it needs to not break them. So they need to be in front of the impressive men, the older ones that are respected. They need to be invited to overcome danger or adversity or something like that and make it to the other side in front of everyone else, in front of their peers. So you got to set up some things like that where they can experience, because you can tell somebody something, but when they experience it, we know that's a different thing. And infuse God into it, obviously. It's like, and then there's you get the Lord's presence in there, and the Lord's affirmation is there because it's these men that following God that are showing these men this rite of passage and stuff like that. We do need things like that. So anything John Eldredge wrote, you probably already love. John Tyson has a new book called The Intentional Father that I just picked up. It's in my backpack, but I'm about to dive into that, and I've heard great things about that as well. But yeah, go, man. More power to you. Go on that journey, because
I've got a 6-year-old girl.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think for us as dads with girls,
That's also important. Yeah.
so huge
Yes.
to be intentional there.
100%.
To model that, and
That's right.
but it's scary as all get out.
Yeah. I mean, so it is frightening. You're ahead of me. But like, my friends, it's like they'll take I was at Valentine's the other night with my wife, and I looked over there, I was like, who is that woman that Tom Crandall is with? Like, what's he doing? That's not his wife. And she's like, that's his daughter. He took his daughter, his 15-year-old daughter out for Valentine's Day. So I finding ways to treat her like her husband needs to treat her someday, is the little bit that I have for you. Ask me, maybe I'll just ask you, Yes, sir.
Just in your experience, for leaders and parents, what are some of the major insecurities that come up from this topic? And the second part of the question would be, what should we find our confidence in when it comes to diving into this topic? Because I think a lot of that can have to do with that moment of conversation. You're actually sitting down with them. I think especially in the teenager arena, you're wanting to maintain openness, speak in truth, but then also stay relevant in what they're trying to talk about at the same time. So just in your experience, what are some of those insecurities, the common ones that come up a lot, and what can we find our confidence in when we have those conversations?
Insecurities in a young person that's wondering if they're gay, for example, something like that.
No, with leaders and parents.
Okay.
Having the conversation, or hosting the conversation.
Hosting the conversation corporately in the youth group, or just with the individual that is sitting down with you?
Probably more one-on-one.
One-on-one. And so this person that sat down with the youth pastor is, what's their context?
He's saying, what are the things that as a parent or as somebody talking, what are you insecure? Like, I don't know how to talk about this. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, I'm uncomfortable. Where do we go with it?
Oh, I see. To help the parents
Yeah.
know how, okay.
Prepare us for how bad it's going to be.
Prepare you for how bad it's going to be. Yeah.
If you've never struggled with it,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the thing. It's like, I don't understand this.
Okay. Sorry, I'm slow on the uptake here.
You're feeling insecure about having the conversation because you're like, I don't really know what to say or how to. You've
Yeah.
things already.
Yeah. This sounds like the cheap answer, but I think you don't need to worry about knowing you just be an amazing listener. Be safe, be vulnerable, be aware of how you talk about other people, because when we critique other people, then we wonder if we're going to be critiqued, right? So even if it's not on a sexual topic, so just be as much the environment that is safe that you can be, and let your kids know that they're so important because you're focused on them, you have time for them, that kind of thing. And then, like I was saying earlier, the vulnerability thing. If you share some of your vulnerabilities, they will get a sense for whether they can share theirs or not. And then in those moments, it's like, you're just paying attention to every single thing they're saying, what their face looks like, whether they're fidgeting. You're just, and then you ask follow-up questions. And go do a crash course on sales training. The best salespeople, selling is in the kingdom is serving. So it's like the best salespeople, they have paid so much attention to everything you said and didn't say that they know what you want, and they know what you care about, and so then they know what to offer you. And so you're just being an amazing student of that unique person, so that you can tee up the right follow-up question, or that kind of thing. I don't know because there's so much. There's so many different. As I said, it's so customized with what the lies are that the enemy has told the different people and why they've come to feel this way. Because in my experience, over half of people with LGBTQ feelings were physically or sexually abused. But then the other 30, 40, 50%, it wasn't that. There's all these different things that could have happened to them. But if you're carrying in your mind that there is a challenge to experience of intimacy, feeling loved, cherished, known, accepted, that kind of thing in your family, by their peers, by God, if it's those types of things that you're aware of that need to be bolstered or could have been just blown out, and you're being an amazing student of everything they're telling you, I think you're going to have enough information to work with.
Can we do one more?
Yep.
Rich?
Yes.
Real quick scenario, we have a 23-year-old daughter raised in the church, has been taught about God's view of gender and sexuality.
Yep.
As a late teenager, she came out that she was, attracted to females. Now living in this lifestyle, we've had the conversation whether she's clear about how we feel.
Yep.
But we also have stopped having that conversation because we felt like it was pushing her away
Yep.
from our relationship. So we don't. But
Yep.
sometimes I think, do we know when to bring that up? Do we know
Uh-huh.
we love her? We have a great relationship with her now.
Mhm.
We don't. I don't know. Sometimes when do we say, okay, Natalie, we just want to remind you this is not what pleases
Mhm.
God.
Mhm.
But I don't want to
Mhm.
push her away. So how do you know when to bring it up?
Yeah. I think I would need the Lord to prompt me to bring it up again. And instead, I would be really kind of one of the first things I said, being like, okay, so Lord, what is it? What is Proverbs? Was it 2, verse 3 and 4? What was that? I'll think of it in a second. It's such a perfect verse for this. Trust in the Lord. Sorry. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he'll direct your path. So I think that's a really helpful mindset for this. So with a scenario like that where I don't have control over my adult child, right? They're going to do what they want to do. So I proactively, I think it's very easy for that to be a refrigerator verse. That's like, oh, that's cute. I learned that in Sunday school. Trust in the Lord, trust and obey, And I think, and so for me, whoa, no, that was a real admonition from the Lord for me to proactively trust in the Lord with regard to my daughter, okay? Lean not on my own understanding. In all of my ways, acknowledge him. So I'm going to be proactively acknowledging God as father and captain of my daughter's life. I'm acknowledging him as her counselor, as her protector, even if she may not be traveling with him at this season or whatever. I'm stirring that up, that I'm expecting that the Lord is these things to and for her. And then expecting that he's going to direct her path. And expecting he's going to direct my path with regard to how to interact her. So this is because I'm a very practical person, so I would ask your question in your situation, okay, so tell me what to do. But I think this is one of those, there's not much to do, except for there's a ton to do with regard to my putting a demand on God and my expecting him to come through. Does that make sense? I think if I would put the weight there as opposed to, well, I really should, because I have friends who, have come out of that life and they're like, my mom told me when I came out to her, she said, I don't agree with this, but this is the last time you're going to hear it from me, or whatever. But I made it, this is what I believe. Okay, now let's go on to caring about you. And later the Lord got a hold of him, that kind of thing. So I think it's one in the prayer space because she knows you haven't changed your opinion, right? Yeah. Thank you guys so much.
I know we've lost a few people here, but man, this was good. One of the things I was just thinking about how I grew up, and one of the things I've noticed about this generation, I use the word, they feel like they don't have a lot of grit. Yeah. And I think, the way we grew up is get over it, right. Step in, your feelings don't matter. This is what's right, what you're doing. But I think what you've kind of opened my eyes to is to really go, you have to recognize, you do have to handle them a little differently. And that, I just love that. Just where did that start? Where did that come in? Where did that hurt come in? And just that love, and it's so different than, maybe we should have been taught that, maybe that's how we should have had. We probably needed both. But I do recognize that this is a little bit fragile of a generation, and I think that's a really good advice on how to deal with them. So how to handle and love them. So, man, this is amazing. I just, aren't you thinking like, man, who should have come here tonight? It's like, why? I'm just thinking how many people. So we'll have this available online. But thank you, Ken. And I don't know if you hang out for a few more minutes. I know it's late, but if anybody wants to just talk to you personally, they can. So let's give it up for him. Yeah.